Draco Malfoy and the cousin he'd never asked for. Thank you very much. By Draco will hear about this. Chapter 7. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. Lupin's story was long and began far into his childhood when he was bitten by a werewolf and turned into one. Draco quite instinctively took a step backwards as Lupin revealed his condition and felt like a horrible person when he saw the resigned disappointment in his teacher's eyes. Lupin explained that to accommodate him safely at Hogwarts despite his condition, the Shrieking Shack was built for him to withdraw to throughout every full moon so that he would pose no danger to other students. The Whomping Willow was planted to keep students from following him down the passageway. Rumors were spread that the house was haunted to keep the locals away. Despite everything, though, Lupin could not keep his secret for long. His friends soon realized where he was disappearing to every few weeks, and to support their friend, they secretly became unregistered animagi. They couldn't keep me company as humans, so they kept me company as animals, Lupin said with a smile. A werewolf is only a danger to people. They sneaked out of the castle every month under James's invisibility cloak. They transformed and joined me in the shack. Under their influence I became less dangerous. My body was still wolfish, but my mind seemed to become less so when I was with them. He went on explaining how they left the shelter of the Shrieking Shack together despite the danger and explored the Hogwarts grounds and Hogsmeade to their fullest. They wrote the Marauders' map, which impressed Draco more than he could put in words. But there had been many close calls, and one of them had involved Professor Snape of all people. We were in the same year, Lupin told them, and, we didn't like each other very much. Apparently Snape had poked around trying to find out where Lupin went once a month, and Black had played a joke on him, had told him how to get into the tunnel to find Lupin. Harry's father, though, had pulled him back before he could be hurt. Still, he had glimpsed Lupin's wolf form at the end of the tunnel. He was forbidden to tell anybody but Dumbledore, Lupin said, and from that time on he knew what I was. So that's why Snape doesn't like you, Harry muttered, because he thought you were in on the joke. That's right. Snape's cold, snarling voice rang from the corridor, making all of them freeze. Then the door jumped open and Snape stepped into the room, one pointed at Lupin, his expression one of nasty triumph. Hermione screamed. Black jumped up, both alarmed and livid. Harry twitched violently beside Draco, who merely stared at the scene in front of him in shock. He had not noticed Snape's arrival. How had none of them heard him approach? He must have used magic to soften every noise he made, but how had he... You're wondering, perhaps, how I knew you were here, Snape said softly, dangerously. I've just been to your office, Lupin. You forgot to take your potion tonight, so I took a goblet full along. And very lucky I did. Lucky for me, I mean. Lying on your desk was a certain map. One glance at it told me all I needed to know. I saw you running along this passageway and out of sight. Severus, Lupin began, but Snape did not pause to let him speak. I've told the headmaster again and again that you've been helping your old friend into the castle, Lupin. And here's the proof. Professor, Draco said loudly, you're misunderstanding. He didn't... Quiet, Malfoy, Snape spat. You're in enough trouble as it is. Do not make your situation worse. But Professor Lupin did nothing wrong, he protested hotly, and Black is innocent. If you just let them... Enough! Snape bellowed, and with a loud banging noise he conjured ropes that wound themselves around Lupin's body, immobilizing him. Black started at him, but Snape had already raised his wand towards him. Give me a reason, he whispered. Give me a reason to do it, and I swear I will. Professor Snape? Hermione spoke up, her voice quivering. It wouldn't hurt to hear what they've got to say, would it? As Snape turned to snap at Hermione, though Harry was already moving swiftly, he picked up his wand from where it had fallen to the ground as Lupin had been bound. Draco copied him, collecting the rest of them and handing theirs back to both Hermione and Weasley as Snape turned back to threaten Black with the Dementors. Harry, on the other end, crossed the room to block the exit. Harry tried once more to reason with Snape, but Draco could have told him it was no use. Snape, fired on by their old-school rivalry, seemed too incensed to see sense. The argument soon turned into shouts, and Draco waved his wand behind Snape's back. So did both Hermione and Weasley. By pure chance, they all shot a disarming spell at Snape at the exact same moment. The force of the combined spells knocked him off his feet and into the nearest wall, and when he slid to the floor, he was unconscious.
"You shouldn't have done that," Black said, sounding disconcerted. "You should have left it to me."
"Well, you weren't doing that good of a job, to be quite honest," Draco noted, and then bent down to help Professor Lupin out of his confinement, ignoring Hermione's mini breakdown about attacking a teacher pointedly. When the man was finally free once more, he got to his feet and shot Draco a grateful smile.
"Thank you,"
he said. "You too, Harry."
"I'm still not saying I believe you," Harry warned. "Well, it's time we offered you some proof," Black said decisively, turning to Weasley. "You boy, give me Peter. Now."
Weasley, being the troll he was, objected vehemently, claiming that there was no proof that Scabbers, of all rats in the world, was their old friend in Animagus form. Black, though, insisted that it was him, that he had recognized him in the photo of the Weasleys in the Daily Prophet over the summer, when it happened to fall into his hands, and had broken out of Azkaban consequently to seek his revenge, using his Animagus form to slip past the Dementors. He pulled out the paper for proof to show it to Lupin, who gasped after studying it closely.
"My God!" he muttered. "His front paw!"
"What about it?" Weasley demanded.
"He's got a toe missing,"
said Black meaningfully, and just like that, it all fell into place for Draco.
"All they ever found in Pettigrew was a finger,"
he recalled, and Harry stared at him, eyes widening in understanding.
"Of course," Lupin breathed. "So simple. So brilliant. He cut it off himself." "Just before he transformed,"
Black confirmed, retelling the events of the day he had cornered Pettigrew after the death of Harry's parents, and how he had blown up the street and faked his own death before fleeing in rat form. Weasley still fought them tooth and nail, refusing to hand over his bet until Draco had had enough. He crossed the room towards Weasley in quick strides and pushed the other boy onto the empty bed. He went wobbling and let go of the rat in his wandless hand. As a consequence, the rat tried to take flight, but Lupin caught it before it could jump off the bed, holding it none too gently in a firm grip.
"Ready, Sirius?"
he asked. The other man nodded, picking up Snape's wand from the floor.
"Together?"
"I think so." And then, on the count of 3, they both shot a well-aimed spell at the struggling rat. Lupin let go of him, and the rodent froze in mid-air, twisting madly, and then the transformation started. Draco stared, spellbound, as Weasley's shabby rat took on the form of an even shabbier person, his hair colorless and wild, balding in places, skin to the bones, not unlike Black across from him. He was cowering in their midst, eyes darting back and forth between Black and Lupin. "Well, hello, Peter," Lupin said, his tone calm and fake pleasant. "Long time no see."
"Sirius, Remus,"
Pettigrew stuttered.
"My friends, my old friends."
Draco then averted his eyes from the scene, instead watching Harry. His friend was deathly pale, and his flashing green eyes were glued to Pettigrew, pain and fury shining through them in equal measure. Draco had to ball his hands into fists to stop himself from reaching out to him, the urge to help and comfort suddenly overwhelming. He missed most of the rational discussion Lupin was trying to have with Pettigrew, too distracted, but he zoned back in when Black turned to Harry, addressing him directly, pleading with him.
"Believe me,"
he croaked.
"Believe me. I'll never betray James and Lily. I would have died before I betrayed them."
And suddenly Draco saw himself in Sirius Black, a boy who'd do anything for his best friend, and who would never, ever have let any harm come to him if he could prevent it. Harry seemed to see the same, or something similar, because he nodded.
"No!"
Pettigrew yelled in despair, falling to his knees, pleading with them as both Black and Lupin closed in on him, wands raised. The scenes that followed were anything but pretty. Pettigrew pleaded not only to his former friends, but to Weasley, Hermione, and Draco, and even dared speaking to Harry until finally he confessed. He was an ugly thing, even more so when he was sobbing uncontrollably.
He was taking over everything,"
he wailed.
"What was there to be gained by refusing him?"
"What was there to be gained by fighting the most evil wizard who have ever existed?" Black mocked. Only innocent lives, Peter.
You don't understand. He would have killed me, serious.
Then you should have died! Black yelled. Died rather than betray your friends, as we would have done for you! You should have realized, Lupin said quietly. If Voldemort didn't kill you, we would. Goodbye, Peter. The two men stood shoulder to shoulder, wands raised, ready to take the long overdue revenge for their mutual friends, and a part of Draco, the nasty one buried deep inside of him, cheered them on, waiting for it to happen. This man was to blame, that Harry had no parents, hadn't known love for the most part of his life, was returned to these awful muggles, summer for summer, suffering more than Draco could begin to imagine. No! Harry called to all their shock and jumped in front of Pettigrew, blocking him from the path of their wands. You can't kill him, he gasped. You can't. Draco gaped, not understanding. How could Harry protect Pettigrew after everything he had done? After how much he had wanted to see Black dead after hearing Fudge's version of the story? Harry, this piece of vermin is the reason you have no parents, Black snarled. This cringing bit of filth would have seen you die too without turning a hair. You heard him. His own stinking skin meant more to him than your whole family. I know, Harry panted. We'll take him up to the castle. We'll hand him over to the Dementors. He can go to Azkaban. Just don't kill him. Harry really was too inherently good a person, Draco thought, as Pettigrew threw himself to Harry's feet, thanking him profusely, and Harry backed away in disgust. I'm not doing this for you, he spat. I'm doing this because I don't reckon my dad would have wanted his best friends to become killers. Just for you. There was a long silence before both Black and Lupin eventually bowed to Harry's will. They tied Pettigrew up, fixed Weasley as best as they could, and levitated Snape to follow after them before they set off down the stairs and out of the wrecked building through the tunnel. Crookshanks led the way, followed by Weasley and Lupin, both chained to the human rat, and Black went after them, levitating Snape ahead of them. At some point, he turned to catch Harry's eyes, saying, You know what this means? Turning Pettigrew in? You're free, Harry returned. Draco thought he knew where this was going, and he was proven right when Black continued. Yes, but I'm also... I don't know if anyone ever told you. I'm your godfather. Draco took Hermione's arm and slowed their steps, purposefully falling back to give the two of them some privacy. He smiled tentatively at her as they continued, far enough behind to only be able to catch bits and pieces of the conversation. Harry seemed excited, ecstatic at the prospect of leaving his Muggle family behind, and Draco felt happy for him, though he was also worried. Though he felt a certain affection for his cousin now, knowing his real circumstances. It was nice to know that he had some decent relatives after all. Though he thought that the whole situation was still too tangled up for him to promise Harry an escape like that. What if something went wrong? What if nobody believed the real story? What if Black did not walk free at the end of it? And what if he did? Would the Wizarding Society be able to just disregard years and years of seeing him as an evil, deranged murderer and let him live in peace? Every environment was better for Harry than the one he had at Surrey. Draco knew that. But it would not do to move him from one hellhole to another, either. When they reached the end of the tunnel, Crookshanks slid out to press the knot that froze the Whomping Willow. He really was an amazingly smart cat, Draco thought in fascination. Hermione was right to be fiercely proud of him. After Weasley, Pettigrew, and Lupin had climbed out, Black levitated Snape out and letting Harry, Hermione, and Draco pass ahead of him. He sent Draco a quick grin, which Draco returned before following after his friends. The sun had set in the time they had spent inside the shrieking shack, and the grounds were dark and gloomy, clouds blocking the light from the stars and moon. They continued their way on to the castle, and Draco was running the story through his head, trying to think of the best way to prove their account of the story to the officials. Pettigrew would try to turn the whole thing on Black once he got the chance, he knew, and Snape, once awake, would be no help, so they had to... His thought process was interrupted, though, by the moon breaking through the clouds. It's full moon, he thought distractedly, before coming to an abrupt halt. It was full moon! Lupin had frozen in his steps and he was twitching violently. Black seemed to have realized what was happening a moment later because he jumped in front of Harry, Hermione, and Draco, shielding them. Oh my!
Hermione gasped.
He didn't take his potion tonight! He's not safe!
Run!
Black hissed.
Run, now!
Draco reached for Harry's arm, but he didn't move, his eyes on Weasley, still chained to Pettigrew, and by extension, Lupin. Draco cursed.
Leave it to me! Run!
Black called. Lupin made a snarling noise as he turned, though Black was blocking Draco's view. He pulled at Harry's arm once more, whimpering, but the other boy didn't budge. Before them, Black turned back into his Animagus form and lunged at Lupin, who had fully transformed into a werewolf by now. He pulled at Lupin's neck, dragging him away from Weasley, and Pettigrew, who suddenly free from the threat of his old school friends, acted immediately. He dove for the wand Lupin had dropped, throwing Weasley off his feet, and before any of them could react, he was firing spells at everything nearby, Weasley, Crookshanks, and them!
Expel the armies!
Harry yelled, regaining his composure the fastest, but disarming Pettigrew had only so much effect since the other man had started turning back into his Animagus form too.
Stay where you are!
Harry shouted to no effect. It was impossible to find a rat in such darkness, moonlight or no moonlight. Hermione rushed to check on Weasley. Harry was shouting for Black, who had taken off after Lupin and disappeared from sight. Draco, though, was looking at the sky. Suddenly, as if someone had turned up the temperature, it grew incredibly cold. Cold enough for their breath to fog in front of them.
No! Draco moaned. Serious,
Harry muttered, and then he was running. No! Draco called, tearing himself out of his fearful daze to take off after Harry.
Harry, wait! It's too dangerous!
There was no stopping him, though, as he sprinted towards the lake, desperate to get to his godfather before the Dementors did. Nevertheless, when they reached the shore, they were already closing in on Black, who had turned back to his human form and was cowering on the ground, seeming powerless to even move.
No, Harry moaned. No, please.
Draco, though, could barely hear him over the noises breaking out inside his head, the turning of pages, the scratching of a quill, damp footsteps on the stone floor, Harry's voice screaming his name.
Think of something. Think of something happy,
Harry called to him, raising his wand.
What?
Draco croaked, but Harry was already shouting an incantation, his voice shaking.
Expecto Patronum! Come on, Draco, please! Expecto Patronum!
Draco's hand was shaking so hard he could barely hold his wand up. He tried to repeat after Harry, but the words came out breathy, barely louder than a whisper. Nothing happened.
Expecto Patronum!
Harry shouted, and a thin silver veil spread from Harry's wand, the shadow of a Patronus. Draco felt cold, so cold. His wand dropped from his hand, and he pressed his shaking fists against his temples, willing the noises to stop. But they only grew stronger, and it was like he was there again down in that chamber, and he was going to die. He deserved to die. Weasley was right. He was no better than his father. He had attacked Hermione. Harry was going to hate him. Hate him. Hate him. Hate him! When he came to again, he was under warm covers, but he felt weak and shivery. He could hear voices, but they sounded like he was hearing them from underwater, and he could not make out what they were saying. It was Harry's voice that broke through, loud and clear, shouting, "You got the wrong man!" Draco tore his eyes open with a lot of effort. He was in the hospital wing, he realized, and there were a lot of people on their feet arguing on top of their lungs. Harry, Hermione, Madame Pomfrey, Professor Snape, the Minister for Magic.
"We're not confounded!"
Harry yelled.
Minister! Professor!
Madame Pomfrey called, her voice indignant.
I must insist that you leave. Potter is my patient, and you should not be distressed.
Draco sat up, but nobody took note of him. They kept arguing, though what about Draco's sluggish mind could not comprehend. His eyes fell on the bar of chocolate on his bedside table, and he reached for it automatically. Just as he was taking his first bite, Dumbledore entered the room, and all attention turned to the headmaster. There was more shouting, but Dumbledore seemed immune to it, as he requested in a calmness that stood in stark contrast to everyone's shouts, to talk to Harry, Hermione, and Draco. Hermione turned to look at Draco then, eyes wide and panicky, and Draco felt the chocolate work its magic. Warmth spread through his stomach, and his mind cleared a little. He took another bite. Snape was fighting with Dumbledore now, and the words started to register with Draco. Black was lying, he claimed. Pettigrew had not been in the Shrieking Shack, nor on the grounds, and when Hermione pointed out that he'd been knocked out, he yelled at her to be quiet. Draco almost choked on the chocolate in his mouth to back Hermione up, but Dumbledore was faster.
"I would like to speak to the 3 students alone,"
he insisted.
Cornelius, Severus, Poppy, please leave us.
Headmaster, Madame Pomfrey objected. They need treatment. They need rest.
This cannot wait. I must insist.
They left eventually with varying degrees of protest, Snape the last of them. As soon as the door had fallen closed after them, Harry and Hermione were talking at the headmaster, but Dumbledore silenced them by simply raising his hand.
It is your turn to listen,
he told them, his voice firm and urgent.
And I beg you will not interrupt me because there is very little time.
Thankfully, Harry and Hermione obeyed, and he continued.
There is not a shred of proof to support Black's story except your word. And the word of 3 13-year-old wizards will not convince anybody. A street full of eyewitnesses swore they saw Sirius murder Pettigrew. I myself gave evidence to the ministry that Sirius had been the Potter's secret keeper. Professor Lupin can tell you,
Harry began.
Professor Lupin is a werewolf, Harry, Draco pointed out in a shaky voice. He'll be trusted less than us, especially seeing his connection to Black. He's also unable to tell us anything since he's currently deep in the forest, and by the time he is human again it will be too late.
Dumbledore added.
Sirius will be worse than dead. Listen to me, Harry,
he pressed as Harry opened his mouth to protest.
It's too late. You understand me. You must see that Professor Snape's version of the events is far more convincing than yours.
He hates Sirius,
Hermione called desperately.
all because of some stupid trick Sirius played on him.
Sirius has not acted like an innocent man. The attack on the fat lady, entering Gryffindor Tower with a knife. Without Pettigrew alive or dead, we have no chance of overturning Sirius's sentence.
But you believe us? Harry interrupted.
Yes, I do,
Dumbledore assured him.
But I have no power to make other men see the truth, or to overrule the Minister of Magic. What we need,
he said, turning to Hermione and Draco, a pointed look in his eyes,
is more time.
Draco immediately understood the implication, even though Hermione took a moment, but when Draco met her eyes, her mouth fell open, and she muttered a soft, "Oh."
Now, pay attention, Dumbledore continued. Sirius is locked in Professor Flitwick's office on the 7th floor, 13th window from the right of the West Tower. Remember, you must not be seen. Mr. Malfoy, Miss Granger, you both know the law. You know what is at stake. You must not be seen.
Draco nodded once, in determination. Harry was looking back and forth between him and Hermione, confusion evident on his face.
I am going to lock you in, Dumbledore noted. It is...
He looked at his watch.
5 minutes to midnight. You have been here for about an hour. 2 turns to be safe. Good luck.
And with that, he left the room, closed the door behind himself, and turned the lock.